All right, Kim, thank you so much for joining us today on the SALTovation podcast. It's great to have you here.
Well, I'm very excited to be joining you as well. So hopefully we have some really good conversation on different things that we're doing in the industry.
Yes, and on that note, so can you give us kind of what your professional background is?
Sure. So I'm a CPA by trade. I still am licensed. I practiced for a little over 30 years before I joined CPA.com last year in June. Originally, I had a tax and accounting practice, which basically at that point in time had SALT and payroll as part of the service offerings that we did. And then in December of 2010, I was actually merging with an Illinois regional firm when the Whipley opportunity came back around for them. So I tailcoat merged into Whipley. And at that point, I actually took over the national accounting practice that Whipley had. Now, at that point in time, Whipley was a large regional, Wisconsin regional firm. So we were the first Illinois merger, and we had 2 offices in Minnesota and 2 offices in India. And when I actually left Whipley, we were a top 20 firm. So many, many, many mergers later, I got a lot of experience in adding other accounting practices to the one that I was working with. So
then why choose to leave public accounting for CPA.com? What was that drive? Or what was that?
So I'd spent 30 years in practice, like I mentioned, and I loved mentoring younger associates or people that were early on in their careers. It was one of the best things that I did. And also I loved working with clients, but I really felt like I wanted to do something more. And I had all this experience with, everything I had done. Like I said, Whipley was a regional firm when I joined. I had my own small firm. They were a medium-sized firm, if you want to look at it that way. And when I left, they were a very, very large firm. So I had done the gamut of understanding the opportunities and the challenges of being in different size firms. And I just felt like I really had more to share. So the CPA.com opportunity came up, and I kind of thought that my background was perfect for the opportunity. And I just jumped at the chance to make a change, which was kind of scary because for 30 years I'd been doing, really predominantly the same thing, although in different size environments. But I just kind of switched my mentoring, even though I still do mentoring on an individual basis, but I switched my mentoring over to firms. I look at it just as a different mentoring challenge and an opportunity that I've been given, a little bit later on in my career. So
interesting. That makes a lot of sense though. At a certain point, I'm at that getting close to retirement age, and kids are almost launched, and I'm like, what am I doing? I have a firm, trying to support the younger generation on our team to have a future at our firm and wherever that lies. Yeah, it's super interesting.
Yeah.
And obviously encourage the younger generation to pursue these careers because they're really great.
Yeah. And I think, when you say, people wanting to become partners, I think one of the things that we really work with when we talk to firms is having a career path, especially inside of the CAS practice, but even inside of a SALT practice. Whipley's SALT didn't exist when I came into the practice, right? And we did most of those services inside of CAS. It kind of more, and same with our payroll group. They were all part of CAS originally. And then by the time I left, those were all separate service lines and had matured and added advisory to all of them as well. So it was no longer a compliance-based business. It was now, a compliance and advisory-based business. So, we've seen a lot of changes happen over the years inside of practices. And I think the importance of that is all the service offerings that have been added really need to have career paths so that individuals feel like they can, if their desire is to become partner, and not everybody's desire is, but if the desire is to become partner, that we give them those opportunities in these other areas of service.
Right. It's a real great opportunity, I think, to be entrepreneurial, which is why I stayed in public accounting despite multiple offers to go into industry. So I thought, well, once I figure out the problem, because clearly you have one, then what am I going to do is become rote and not the same, but just similar. And so I'm like, I really love the diversity of lots and lots of clients and lots of issues and trying to figure it all out.
Yeah.
And it's a giant puzzle.
I never did the private side either. And maybe that was part of it. I always thought I'd get bored working with just like one company versus the opportunity to work with many companies. So
yeah. And you're always on the curve. You're always learning. There's always something new to learn in this, in all of it, new accounting practices, international, national, new rules, new laws, all the good things. So it's a constantly learning profession, which keeps you on your toes.
I am not going to lie to you though. I always tell everybody, if I had to practice in the salt space, you would probably have to stab my eyeballs out. So I'm always so incredibly thankful that there are people that love that space. I mean, like
Why is
Whitley
it though
had
that you think
many,
people
many
hate
people.
it so
I don't
much? I
know.
mean,
I think
there's
it's
such a
just
negative.
I think for me, it's like, it's so like standard driven. Like there's so many rules and regulations that you need to understand. I was always just incredibly happy. Like Jessica Macklin at Whipley is who I always worked with. We were kind of in the same region. And actually I'm going to do a session with her at DCPA on the crossover between SALT and CAS.
I
and how
saw
you bring
that on the
advisory.
schedule.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm excited about that because I think now it's an opportunity out there that is still very, very, it's a very underutilized practice, right? So, I just,
well, and it's just
I
not
think,
experience. We have
no.
I'm an attorney and a CPA, which is partly why I practice in the area because I think it's incredibly creative to look at the rules and see how they apply, right? Because it's not black and white, especially with software and information services and tech and biotech. I mean, there's just so many nuances to business. It's not like everybody sells a thing. Right. And that's taxable. So sales tax is very nuanced, income tax, states are very nuanced. So the creativity aspect of like, what's your position? Who are you in this state allows for some reattribution of income and also some, obviously some compliance services that you need to manage the expectations of each of those governments to manage your business risk. But, yeah, I think that's really interesting though, because so many people do really hate our area. And I really wish that we didn't have that negative spin because it creates like bad energy around it. I mean, all of us on the team, like we dig on it. Like we don't look at it as negative. We look at it as like, oh, it's a really cool puzzle. We're going to have to go figure out how to do it. And then we have, because business has one sort of rule. And so we just have to apply those rules by state. It's not that hard if you know the business. But we get to dive into the business transactionally, which a lot of providers don't. They roll it up. They do what is the gross revenue? They don't look at the nuances. We look at the transactions. So I think it's really interesting as you look how business makes money. And I think a lot of people
we need we need all sorts to make the world go around. That's why I'm always incredibly happy that people like to actually, even in the payroll space, the payroll tax return space and the sales tax space. But I also think, or in SALT all the way around, I think the other thing on the SALT side of the house is that, a lot of businesses don't even realize that there's a lot more to SALT than a lot of them think of it as sales tax, right? And even then, they don't know the rules from state to state. And the pandemic has so changed the dynamics of how businesses work that a lot of businesses have become national and they don't know what the rules are. Sometimes they think, well, I'm not selling a product. Okay, but you're sending somebody into that state for a product that you shipped, right? So like, what are all the rules on that? Where do you have to file tax returns? Where do I need to get registered as a business? Most people just skate right past all of that. And, I always look at it as, is ignorance bliss, but is it really ignorance? I think it's more of like, they don't even know what they don't know. Right. So,
and it's fear. There's a lot of fear of like overwhelm and stress, which I find very interesting because they figured out, I have clients that sell 46,000 products, right? I'm like, how to like, a plumbing company knows how to tell you, this is all the things you buy in order to replumb your kitchen. How did you do that? You could absolutely do tax. Absolutely. Because if you could figure that problem out, it's very similar, logical, add the things. But there is this thing out there of complexity. And I think tech has tried to solve some of it, but they lack the knowledge of the tax background. They have the tech, but without the tax acumen. So we've got this marriage happening in software automation that's not allowing both sides to be the way it needs to be to advocate on behalf of clients, which I know is why CPA.com years ago chose Vertex as its chosen provider. I don't think that's so much the case anymore. I'm not sure, but because they were like the preeminent, they've been around the longest and all that good stuff. So but there are a lot of providers out there now.
There are. Yeah, there are. And there are a lot of choices. It's just like all the rest of the technology too. And it's like fairly overwhelming sometimes how many options you have out there. But the importance of those options, I think, especially in the SALT space, is it is an area that you have to have some expertise and you have to spend some time digging into it. And businesses don't do that on their own, right? And I think the other thing, the other thing that maybe has some bad connotations around it on the SALT side is it's another tax, right? Or you're telling your clients that, oh, now you might have to do sales tax or you might have to do income tax in multiple states. And they're just like, taxed out, right? They're just tax, tax, tax. Everybody always wants money from me. And so it's not always even a pleasant conversation. It's not an area where you can work with client. I mean, you have to work through the value side of it, right? And even like the compliance side of it and like ease of mind that you're doing the right thing, or at least you've been told like what, that right thing is. Prior to me leaving Whipley, I actually did a wealth and asset management build out, and CAS was one of the service offerings that we did. And when you think about what that wealth and asset management industry does, they have clients everywhere, all the way across the United States. Right. And they're flying to all of these places. And I used to bring Jessica into my conversations all the time and say, talk to them about Nexus. Talk to them about what their state filing requirements are. They may not have a sales tax, but they may also have a sales tax. Some states tax on service, right? So it's like they need to understand. And then from there, they can make the decision about where they want to file and where they don't want to file.
Well, it's funny being at the big four because I was national. So I really cared about the big states, Illinois, New York, California, Texas, Florida, 10% of the U.S. nation. I could care less about South Dakota, North Dakota. But then I worked for Eide Bailey, and they were situs in North Dakota, South Dakota. So that was our biggest offices, and the build out sprung for there. So I had went to, council. I went to hearings in those states. I flew into Pierre, South Dakota to do a hearing on behalf of a taxpayer. I mean, there are big taxpayers in South Dakota, North Dakota. You would have never known, and also as you get to see America, you see there's a lot happening in our country that a lot of people, that the CPA community doesn't understand, which is why I think SALT is so important for the CPA to build that tech stack or that competency so that the CPA firms can be successful. And then they're not blamed for not telling them, because there is this thing I feel like, I've maybe mentioned that before. My husband, I'm a lawyer and a CPA, and my specialty is state and local, but not income anymore from a federal perspective, right? Even though I have a master's of tax, I've rolled away from being a federal tax practitioner. I'm state and local. So I can't even do my own personal income tax return. And I think a lot of people think, why not? I'm like, because I don't keep up with the personal deductions and so forth. And my husband says to me, who is a securities lawyer and litigator, he says, I don't understand why CPAs say they can do all these things when they can't. They can't do accounting services and compilations and audits and tax returns and financial accounting and income tax. I mean, there's a lot of things in the CPA world that you could do for a living, and you could silo it and get that great, good competency. You don't have to be a generalist. Even you running your own practice that was audit and tax, I can't even imagine how hard that must have been.
Well, back then though, most practices were generalist practices, right? And I think about the practices that we merged in at Whipley, most of those practices were generalist practices. Now, I would say, probably maybe 10 years ago, 5 at for sure at the minimum, that started to change inside of practices. And we started doing exactly what you were saying, is like maybe moving towards a focus. So a practice focus and an industry focus, that became very relevant inside firms. And I think even in the smaller firms, they started thinking about what are we good at and what are we not good at? And let's focus on that. And now you see CAS practices that are really what we call as BPO, business process outsourcing practices, that only focus on CAS. They don't do anything else, or they have CAS and they have tax and they don't do anything beyond that. There's no attest type of services. So I think we're seeing that transition happen within firms. But I will also tell you, there are a lot of firms that are still working on getting rid of the generalist concept. Like it's a hard push to get people, pick your practice, pick your industry. And I think, we look at the CAS side of the practice as an opportunity for individuals that went through accounting curriculums, or maybe economics or business majors or something like that, that really thought their only option was to go into private, to go to work for a company, because they didn't want to do the commitment of the tax season hours or the audit season hours. And so CAS gives them an opportunity, and potentially SALT would as well, but it gives them an opportunity to stay into or enter into public practice or come back to public practice, because there is now this, these consulting opportunities that didn't exist originally. And they looked at it as all compliance based, and it was a drudge of hours. And, so we feel like we're transforming that whole, space from the advisory aspect of it, so that there are opportunities for individuals that really aren't compliance based. Because, a lot of practices a lot of CAS practices look at the financial statement as a byproduct of the service offerings that they're doing. So if we have that mentality and we're thinking CAS practices are, focused on the advisory piece that do the transactional and accounting controller type of functions so that they have good data in order to do the CFO and the trusted advisor. That's all really important for firms, and firms are still very much struggling to try to get there.
Well, yeah, and the data thing too. We actually hired someone who's didn't get a CPA, but is a CPA kind of by training, and decided to become a data wrangler, basically, which is not what is. He's got some extra studying and understanding all data management, so he can assimilate data with lots of different repositories to get good filing information, because people roll things up at the transaction level. Data is so important, and so that has been an interesting pivot for our team to think that way, because we're really good with Excel and making spreadsheets and all that. But is there other things that we can do to ingest to create, what do you call it, some kind of a process that's not like us moving it into a spreadsheet and wrangling it?
Right. Yeah. And I think with all the technology changes that are happening now, one of the things that we are very focused on, and the whole discussion around AI and what does that mean to practices, public accounting firm and CAS practices, is looking at the processes that you're doing manually, looking at the things that you're still doing in those Excel spreadsheets, and saying, what kind of technology can help replace this so that I can move on to the advisory piece, right? So we're trying to automate as much as we can on that back end so that the value that we're bringing to clients is the conversations we're having with them and the knowledge that we can share with them, and the opportunity to help them grow their businesses and, maybe potentially meet their goals, right? So that's our goal is their goal, right? So figuring out how do we work with firms so that we can help our businesses so that we can help them, meet their goals and their growth.
So I'm not sure how much we got to your raid, Meredith, but you take the rest of it.
So, Kim, speaking with that, what is the mission of CPA.com?
So CPA.com actually started as the AI technical arm of the AI CPA. And so we really started with a whole concept of helping firms and practices grow in a digital transformation space. So very focused on technology. What has been added over probably the last few years is we now have a full professional services practice, which is the CAS side of the house is what I lead. We also have an audit side of the house, which is the DAS technology that was built. So working with, on the CAS side, working with firms to help transform their practices, right? So working with them on potentially what's their vision and mission, what service offerings are they going to have, what clients do they want to work with, who's going to do the work, what does that work look like, what processes are there, what technology are we throwing at it, how are we going to price it, how are we going to assess clients coming in so that we know that we're scoping that work appropriately, and ultimately, how are we going to market all of that so that people know what we're selling, right? From a firm perspective. So we're very focused on that side of it. We have a lot of education and training that we focus on. We have coaching and consulting programs that we do. So we've changed a lot from just being the technology arm, but technology is still a very big focus for CPA.com and a huge part of our mission.
Is that like a fee for service thing as well, though, that part of it?
So we do a lot of different things. So we do have offerings that there's a fee attached to them, but we do a lot of freemium type of stuff. So we do tons of webinars that are free, and we do it on our topics that we help, when we help practices transform. Our coaching and consulting is a fee-based practice. Some of our education is free-based. The webinar stuff is free, and some of it is fee. Like we do some workshops and stuff like that have fees attached to them. We do tons of white paper. If you go out on the CPA.com website, there's a ton of resources out there that are all free to firms. And we are getting ready to launch a toolkit in our professional practices for transformation, because we have a lot of firms that are DIY firms. They like to do things themselves, but they want the tools that we use. And it's not all the tools that we use, but it's a lot of the tools that we use in our coaching and consulting program. So if they want to transform their own practice, we're going to give them the essential tools that they can use to get there, right? So, but we have a lot of firms that are going through the coaching program, and we kind of took our workshop that we've always done, the CAS Roadmap workshop that we've done for like 15 years. I went through it in 2017. Maybe it's only been 13 years. I went through it in 2017, and I was like so invigorated on what I learned. And I'm like, oh, this is so cool. I'm going to go back to my practice and I'm going to start implementing. Well, then you go back to your practice, because this was back pre-COVID. So we were on site for a few days together.
Mm-hmm.
So we went back to our practices, got busy with my day-to-day, responsibilities, my leadership role and stuff like that. And then a year later, I reached out to my CPA.com rep and I'm like, okay, what do you have for me? Like, I'm ready to get started now. And she goes, well, the workshop is all we have. This is a long story that I'm going to bring around short.
It's
So
okay.
I'm like, oh, okay. So I took it upon myself. So I really took that DIY role and I worked through transforming now what was a fairly major CAS practice or accounting practice because we had done all these mergers, right? So I had 37 offices. Everybody was doing everything differently. And we're like, where do we start? So when I came to CPA.com, and one of the reasons I joined CPA.com is they asked me to build out our coaching program, our coaching and consulting program. So I took what I wanted, what I was looking for back in 2018 when I came back and said, I've now spent a year not doing anything. Can you help me? And I built it. With a team of people inside of CPA.com, we literally built out an accountable program. So we took some content of the roadmap workshop and dove deep into a lot of that content. And now it's an 18-month program. We do a variety of group sessions and then one-on-one coaching sessions and roundtable sessions. And we pick a new topic each quarter and we work through those topics, building it out with the firms. We provide them with the tools. They have homework. So there's accountability. So you don't go back to your practice and not do anything and then wonder why, your practice isn't transforming. So that was one of the big reasons why I did come to CPA.com so that I could help other firms work through what took me 2 years to do. It was a 2-year project. We had a huge human capital piece of it. So anytime you're working with human capital and change management, there's a lot of warm, fuzzy stuff. And, our HR team was telling us, you just can't do that. You have to go about it this way, so just the human capital part of it for me, because I had a team of 180 people at that point in time that were between India and the US. So we had a lot of changes that we did inside of our practice. And, all of that kind of got rolled into our coaching and consulting.
Interesting.
So freemium and stuff that you have to pay for. And a lot of our freemium.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say a lot of our freemium stuff also comes with CPE. So if you join our webinars and stuff, you get free CPE hours and you can get a lot of them. So, and I think it's a lot of CPAs that are looking for CPE don't realize that there's so much free CPE out there with really good topics and substance.
Yeah, we've taken advantage of it because we're a small firm. We teach and go to things just because we want to stay current with the legal changes and so forth. But we've taken advantage of a lot of that because there's so much out there that's free content that'll give you the CPE hours you want and get some information. It's very interesting the way how that shifted. I know a lot of AI and a lot of associations made their money off the CPE, right? I'm a lawyer too, continually education, but now other providers are giving it and they're being paid sometimes by a vendor or something. So it's really transformed the way you and I get up to date, as opposed to sitting in a conference room. You can get an hour and still move on with the rest of your day and not be completely bonked down, losing several days at work.
Yeah.
Super interesting.
I will tell you though, when we went virtual with everything during the pandemic, I'm like, I missed people. I missed going to conferences. I missed my friends like Jenny Huturi that had the same pain points back then as I had, because our practices were very similar. That you can't shift that part of it, but you definitely can look at other opportunities. And there's so many now, from a virtual perspective, there's just so many that you certainly can solve a lot of that with freebies.
So then with that coaching and mentoring, what do you see CPA firms struggle with a lot? Or is there a common denominator of just kind of reoccurring items that just continually come up when you work with various CPA firms and leadership and whatnot?
Yeah. So Tom Hood just put out a new slide that I thought was really, really interesting. I asked him if I could steal it, and I told him every time I talked about it, I'd throw his name out there. And it looked at April 2023 and April 2024, and it was talking about exactly what you just asked me, like what are firms struggling with, right? And I thought it was interesting to see some of the movement of the topics, and one topic actually went away, but for 2024, it was literally like technology, keeping up with technology due to accelerated digital transformation and Gen AI, and how AI is in every conversation that we have these days, right? Almost like it had never existed before. And really, I talk about it all the time. It's like, I do a lot of work with Sage Intact, and Nicole Kasich is always like, we had AI. It's just people didn't know we had AI, right? So now it's like a buzzword. So that's our current buzzword. The other one was upskilling existing talent, which is still a big struggle with firms, even though we are making some headway on resolving that, especially in the CAS practice space. And then finding and retaining talent is another one. Now, finding and retaining talent was at the top of the list in 2023, and it moved down to, I think, number 3 or 4 in 2024. So maybe we've made a little headway on it, but it's not going away. And part of that is probably because we know that there aren't as many accounting candidates coming out of universities as much as we had, like, when I came out of university. So that's a little bit different. And then the last one is, still working through maintaining a firm culture in a hybrid environment. I think, there still are struggles with that. We hear firms are talking about pulling people back in a couple days a week so that there is some of that sense of community inside of the firms, and, kind of continuing to build culture, because it is kind of hard to build culture when you spend all your time on virtual calls, right? So we're seeing a lot of those changes, but the people side of it is still a big struggle, and technology, is changing faster than it ever has before. So people trying to keep up with all of that is, also a big pain point for firms.